It's the case that made the FBI look like a bunch of amateurs, and the second most famous case involving a hijacked airliner, and the only case of such in US history which remains completely unsolved. It's a case that needs no introduction. The unidentified individual known only as Dan Cooper leapt from a Boeing 727 mid-flight, plunged into the darkened void below to an uncertain fate, $200,000 richer, and was never seen or heard from again. Who was he? Why did he do it? And most importantly, did he survive or make a Looney Tunes style human-shaped hole in the ground somewhere? Welcome back to episode 21 of Super Mystery Bros, the most sensual podcast that you're ever gonna fucking listen to. My name is Nate, and with me tonight, as usual, is Kyle, and we welcome you back to another edge-of-your-seat edition of Super Mystery Bros. So Kyle, do we have any announcements today?
We do have an announcement. If you didn't listen to the one-year retrospective, we are now officially on Instagram, the Super Mystery Bros.
That's
at
our
Instagram.
tag.
Yeah.
At or slash Super Mystery Bros. All one word, no special characters.
Yeah. We are still kind of figuring out how to use Instagram. Nate and I are not big social media users, but we do have a brand new baby Instagram account. If you guys do us a favor, follow us on Instagram. That would be great.
Yeah, we are going to drop episode hints about future episodes, and We'll have our own. I don't know. We're still trying to figure out how to use it and what we're going to use it for, but we will make it worth your while if you do follow us. Is there anything else that you need to announce?
I don't think so.
So next, I wanted to ask you, what can our loyal listeners do to lend us a hand as we make our heroic plunge into the vast and windswept void of the unknown?
Well, listeners, as you know, spooky season is officially here. It's October. Halloween's coming up quick. So why don't you let the kids know about the show by wrapping the Halloween candy you hand out in little sticky notes that say Super Mystery Bros Podcast on them. Really get the word out there. Kids will get the message out really quick. And so will Halloween candy.
Yeah. Also, if you're ever out, you're eating at Applebee's or Chili's, and you can just write "Listen to Super Mystery Bros" on the tip line of the receipt, and that'll surely be the best tip that server has ever gotten.
Indeed.
All right, man, is there anything you want to say up front before we begin on this week's mystery?
No.
Took you long enough.
That was a big question. I want to make sure I got it right.
All right. Thanksgiving. The most wonderful time of the year for any red-blooded, God-fearing American. It's a time where we get together with a bunch of people who we go our entire lives pretending to enjoy the company of, and coping by doing what we do best, stuffing our fat fucking faces with food, and drinking red wine and beer by the gallon. Pop quiz hotshot. What's the number one best Thanksgiving entree?
Entree? Well, there's only one Thanksgiving entree, and that's turkey. Right? If you want to have a discussion, it's about sides, and the side is stuffing.
We're not here to split hairs, Kyle.
Stuffing, man. The stuffing is the best.
Nah, wrong, man. It's the mashed potatoes.
Yeah, I guess. If you're just going like by the numbers, sure. I guess everyone has mashed potatoes. You know what everyone else has at Thanksgiving?
No, I'm talking about the number one best, not the number one most common.
Well, then I disagree.
All right, fine, whatever. Between 1968 and 1972, over 130 planes were hijacked in the skies over America. But in the days long before 9/11, these events were little more than a mild inconvenience, and usually involved some lunatic demanding ransom money and for the plane to be diverted to Cuba, where the hijackers could then escape from the wrath of the US justice system and start a brand new life on a beach somewhere in paradise. Or, this was the idea anyway. But for the rest of the passengers, it was a vacation ruiner, or to others, a great alternative and a valid excuse not to make it to somebody's boring-ass wedding or some lame business meeting, and instead spend some quality time smoking fine cigars and drinking rum in the Caribbean. The problem was getting so bad that the FAA even considered building a complete, full-scale mock-up of the Havana airport in a South Florida field to dupe any potential hijackers into thinking that the plane was landing in Havana when the pilots would really be landing at this mock-up airport, but the plans for it were never fully realized due to the high cost of the project. Back in 1971, on the very day before Thanksgiving, Wednesday, November 24th of 71, the second most famous incident involving a hijacked airliner took place in the skies over the Pacific Northwest, and as it so happens, is still the sole unsolved case of airplane hijacking involving commercial aviation in human history.
In the early afternoon of that day, a mild-mannered, nondescript Caucasian male, thought to be in his mid-40s, wearing a dark suit and tie and carrying an attaché bag, walked into the Portland International Airport and purchased a one-way ticket to the Seattle-Tacoma Airport, also known as SeaTac, from the Northwest Airlines ticketing counter for $20. He gave the name Dan Cooper to the ticket agent. His flight number 305, was departing at 2:50 p.m., and he was assigned to seat 18C on the Boeing 727, which was an aisle seat near the rear of the plane, 4 rows from the very back on the left side of the plane. Sunset on this particular day was at 4:43 p.m. in Portland, so keep this in mind as we move forward in the story. In addition to the man known as Dan Cooper, the flight had 36 other passengers along with 6 crew members. This crew consisted of Captain William Scott, First Officer Bob Radazak, Flight Engineer H.E. Anderson, Flight Attendant Alice Hancock, who served the first-class passengers, and Flight Attendants Tina Mucklow and Florence Schaffner, who served the peasants and unwashed masses in the coach.
All right, man, so have you ever flown pre-9/11?
Yes, I did actually. In the summer before 9/11, I'm fairly certain it was the summer of 2001. I flew solo for my first time to go see my grandpa in New Mexico, and I remember going through what was TSA at the time. You know, you still had to empty your pockets and put everything in the bin and send it through, and my bin comes out the other side, and the security guard grabs the pocket knife I was carrying, right? I was 12, 13 at the time, right? And he opens my pocket knife, and he puts it against the measuring tape, and he folds it back up and hands it back to me, and he goes, "You're right at the limit. You're good to go." And apparently, a 4-inch blade was the limit you were allowed to get on a plane with at the time. Now
Holy
you can't
shit.
get on with toenail clippers.
Yeah, I never flew pre-9/11. The first time I flew on a plane was 2 months after 9/11, and that was to go back east. That was a fucking surreal experience because I've never seen a plane, like a full-sized airliner, that empty in my life since.
Wow.
It was like 1/3 full.
Wow. Yeah. I kind of wish I flew during COVID. You know, I definitely saw some pictures of like 2 people on a big plane. You know,
I flew during COVID. March. I mean, like, never mind. Let's move on.
So I think one more thing we should touch on about flying pre 9/11, especially in the 70s, was the sexualization of flight attendants at the time. You know, there were even commercials of what flight attendants would wear. And so they would get hit on a lot, like way too much, you know, by male passengers. And this is just something we should keep in mind as we start moving forward. It plays into the case just a little bit.
Yeah. So shortly before the plane took off, the smooth and dapper man, known only as Dan Cooper by this point, sat down in his assigned seat and calmly lit up a cigarette, and ordered a bourbon and soda from flight attendant Florence Schaffner, and even tried to tip her for the drink. But she declined the tip, citing airline policy. Shortly after the plane became airborne, the man handed her a note. Thinking that this was just some creepy old dude trying to spit some game by handing her his phone number, she thought nothing of it and proceeded to put it directly into her purse without even reading it. However, when Cooper noticed that she didn't bother reading the paper that he handed to her, he leaned in close to her and quietly told her, quote, "Miss, you'd better look at that note. I have a bomb," end quote.
Schaffner immediately walked away and opened the note, and was shocked and horrified by what she saw. It read, quote, "I have a bomb in my briefcase. I want you to sit beside me," end quote. Paralyzed from fear, and against her better judgment, she sat next to Dan Cooper. He opened up his briefcase enough to show her what appeared to be red sticks of dynamite connected by wires, and told her that all he had to do was connect this wire to that wire, and they'd all be dead unless his demands were met, which were $200,000 in $20 bills, 4 parachutes, 2 main and 2 reserve, and a refueling truck on standby in Seattle before he would allow the plane to land. He also added no funny business, and let her know that more instructions were to come, but that was all they needed to know for the time being. She then showed the note and written instructions to fellow flight attendant Tina Mucklow, who urged her to comply with whatever instructions the man gave. Unbeknownst to the rest of the passengers on the plane, all hell was silently breaking loose amongst the members of the crew.
Schaffner then delivered the notes to Captain Scott in the cockpit, who radioed into Seattle Tacoma International to inform them of the situation that was developing on board their flight. Immediately, the FBI was informed of the skyjacking, and they were on the case. With the FBI now on board, they called the president of Northwest Orient Airlines, Donald Nyrup, and asked him how he wanted to proceed with the situation, to which he asked that all demands of the hijacker be complied with. So with that, the plane began flying in a holding pattern around SeaTac Airport as the authorities on the ground began scrambling to gather up all of the hijacker's demands. As Schaffner returned from the cockpit, Dan Cooper had moved to the window seat across the aisle from where he had been sitting originally. Acutely aware and perhaps hyper-paranoid of leaving evidence behind, he also asked for his handwritten bomb threat note back from the stewardess. So basically at this time, the crew had told the passengers that there was a minor engine problem that meant that they had to spend time flying around the airport, burning up fuel before they could land. So the plane remained in the air for a couple hours instead of just half an hour. And then, none of the passengers seemingly were even aware of the hijacking that was taking place.
Yeah, which is kind of wild because it sounded like hijackings were actually kind of common at this time,
Yeah.
But it also seemed like none ever resulted in deaths or downing of planes. So
no, it was it was more of a minor inconvenience.
Yeah,
it was this shit again. God damn it.
Yeah. So when things don't go perfectly as scheduled, people aren't just freaking out and assuming the worst.
Yeah.
By 5:30 p.m., SeaTac told Captain Scott that all of the hijackers' demands had been met. And just 10 minutes later, the plane was able to touch down at the airport, and then taxied to a well-lit area of the tarmac. He ordered all of the window shades to be closed by the stewardesses, apparently to discourage any police snipers from trying to take him out. Tanker trucks soon arrived to gas up the parked plane. A sole employee of Northwest Airlines came up to the back of the plane carrying the 4 parachutes and ransom money, and was met by flight attendant Tina Mucklow at the aft staircase, which is a fold-out staircase on the ass end of the plane. More on this later. However, as the hijacker saw the parachutes they provided, he was pissed and began screaming that they were all wrong.
Yeah, so apparently SeaTac reached out to McChord Air Force Base and got military-style parachutes that would only open by static lines that are attached inside a military aircraft, like for paratroopers, rather than the civilian-style ones that have manual ripcords. So these would have been useless for him. The only thing that they would have done was to allow him to slam into the ground harder. So what SeaTac did was they reached out to a local skydiving school and bought some parachutes off of the owner. However, in their haste, an employee at the school accidentally included a dummy chute as one of the reserve chutes, which was inoperable and only used for demonstration purposes. A flight which should have only taken a half an hour had taken almost 3 hours, and most of the passengers were blissfully unaware of what had gone on until they had landed. However, as Cooper's demands were now met, he agreed to release all 36 of the passengers and 2 of the 3 flight attendants, with Tina Mucklow being the sole flight attendant kept on board. During this time, Cooper gave his next demands to Tina Mucklow, which were for the plane to fly to Mexico City at an altitude of 10,000 feet, with wing flaps at 15 degrees and landing gear down, all while flying at below 150 knots. But the flight crew had to object, stating that Mexico City was outside of the aircraft's range of operation at those parameters and would have to be refueled somewhere along the way. Reluctantly, Cooper agreed to have the aircraft head to Reno, Nevada first for refueling, before then heading off toward Mexico City. So, something I thought was interesting here was that the crew tried to object to flying that slow, saying that they couldn't do it, but then he barked back at them saying that it would work and to just do it. So to me, this kind of indicates that he might have some link to aviation.
Yeah, so some sort of pilot-related knowledge, you know, specifically to the aircraft, to know that that particular aircraft could do that slow, that altitude, 15 degrees on the flaps, yada, yada.
Yeah.
By 7:30 p.m., all of his demands had been met, and the plane had been cleared for takeoff, with Cooper and 4 crew members. At 10,000 feet, the plane leveled off, and Cooper ordered Mucklow to head up to the cockpit and close the curtain behind her, and not to come out. She observed him standing in the aisle, tying the money bag around his waist as she was closing the curtain. By this point, McChord Air Force Base, which we mentioned in episode 19, dispatched 2 F-106 Delta Dart fighters to follow the 727, along with a training jet, a T-33. Due to the airspeed on the 727 being so slow, they had to fly using an S pattern as to not overtake it. The F-106s were able to make visual contact with the airliner, but the T-33 crew was unsuccessful. At 8 p.m., just 30 minutes after takeoff, the crew felt the air pressure inside of the cabin drop, and Captain Scott noticed a warning light that came on which indicated that the aft staircase had been opened mid-flight. Just several minutes afterward, at about 8:12 p.m., the crew felt the nose of the plane jolt upward momentarily. At 10:15 p.m., the airplane had finally touched down at Reno, shooting sparks all over the runway as the rear staircase of the plane made contact with the runway.
Authorities immediately surrounded the plane, guns drawn. The crew attempted to contact Cooper over the intercom system, but received no reply. After several minutes, the crew mustered up the courage to leave the cockpit to go and check on Cooper, but discovered that he was nowhere to be found. He had assumedly jumped from the plane in midair with his cash, parachutes, and bomb. The only evidence left by the hijacker was a black clip-on tie with a mother-of-pearl tie tack attached to it, some cigarette butts that he had smoked, 2 hairs, one being a body hair and the other being a strand of head hair, and 2 of the 4 parachutes that he had requested. Dan Cooper, his bomb, and all of the money had vanished somewhere in the skies over the Pacific Northwest like a fart into a gentle autumn zephyr.
You have such a beautiful way with words.
Thank you.
The aftermath. Public pandemonium quickly ensued. The entire country was enthralled with the case, and most normal people saw D.B. Cooper as somewhat of a sympathetic character. Merchants cashed in on the craze by selling t-shirts and other D.B. Cooper branded merchandise, and Cooper quickly became the most famous unidentified individual in the country. Regarding the name of D.B. Cooper instead of Dan Cooper, the moniker D.B. came from a journalist who misheard the alleged name of the hijacker, and the name D.B. spread like wildfire. The hijacker never went by the name of D.B., but for whatever reason, the wrong name is the one that stuck. No witnesses on the ground came forward with a sighting report of Cooper, nor did the crew of the Air Force craft see Cooper jump.
Which is understandable, being a dark, cloudy night, and they're busy flying in an S pattern, so...
Yeah.
The authorities quickly began searching for potential suspects with the name Dan Cooper, but of course they turned up no promising leads, as someone with this level of sophistication would not be stupid enough to give his real name to the ticket agent at the airport. Through eyewitness cooperation, particularly flight attendants Tina Mucklow and Florence Schaffner, several composite sketches of the suspect were done. The first initial sketch is now considered to be an inaccurate description of Cooper, but 2 more versions were done in 1972, until one finally was settled on as being more or less pretty much accurate. which is the picture we're using for this episode in the app. Over the course of the following months, thorough and exhaustive searches were conducted all over the area underneath the flight path of the 727 with no success. However, the FBI did have enough foresight to set one last trap, an ace card up its sleeve. They photocopied the serial numbers of every banknote that had been delivered to the skyjacker and laid in wait for the money to start coming into circulation. Just a month after the hijacking, the FBI then provided lists of all the serial numbers of the ransom money to financial institutions all over the country, and by early 1972, the serial numbers of the ransom money was finally released to the general public. However, none of the money ever turned up in circulation, leading some to conclude that the man either didn't survive his jump or that he lost the money during the jump.
The FBI even got the Air Force involved in the search and received help from an SR-71 Blackbird in retracing and photographing the ground below the 727's flight path. But several attempts made by the Blackbird were unsuccessful due to poor weather. Initially, the FBI believed that Cooper had made his jump between Ariel Dam and Battleground, Washington, but revised their estimate the following year in 1972 and concluded that he had most likely jumped out near the town of La Center, Washington, which is all contained in an area just north of the Columbia River, right near the border with Portland, Oregon. In 1978, a deer hunter found an instructional placard for lowering the aft staircase of a 727 near a logging road 13 miles east of Castle Rock, Washington, which would be in line with the FBI's estimation of the 727's flight path, as this area would be just north of where they believed he bailed out. 9 years after the hijacking, in 1980, an 8-year-old boy who had been camping on the banks of the Columbia River with his family happened to find some of the money buried in the sand, which accounted for 3% of the total. It was badly deteriorated after being exposed to the elements for so long, but was conclusively determined to be part of the ransom money. Regarding the ransom money, we'd like to read a portion of an article from King5.com written by Chris Ingalls and published in 2020, which is listed in the source notes for this episode.
Seattle. Armed with an electron microscope and a new theory, amateur scientist Tom Kay has uncovered a new clue in the 49-year-old case of skyjacker D.B. Cooper. Kay used his microscope to identify diatoms, tiny deposits of algae, on Cooper's ransom money that was found mysteriously buried just beneath the sand on the banks of the Columbia River near Vancouver in 1980, 9 years after he hijacked a plane and ransomed 36 passengers for $200,000 and 4 parachutes when it landed in Seattle. Kay examined the ransom bills 12 years ago at the request of the Seattle FBI, but only recently turned his attention to algae that could have been present on the water-soaked money. Quote, "So suddenly the light bulb came on and we wondered if we could use these different types of diatoms that we found on the Cooper bills a long time ago to determine when the money got wet and when the money landed on the banks of the Columbia," end quote, said Kay. The result of Kay's research was published Monday in the journal Scientific Reports, marking the first time that Cooper evidence has been peer-reviewed and published. Quote, "The diatoms that we found on the Cooper money are a spring species," said Kay. "They bloom in the spring. They do not bloom in November when Cooper jumped," end quote. Kay said that's key because it shows that the money ended up in the river months after Cooper jumped on November 24th, 1971. Because the bills only had one season of diatoms on them and did not have diatoms that bloom in the winter, Kay theorizes that the money came out of the water and landed on the bank of Tina Bar, a sandbar on the Columbia River, after only a few weeks or months. Quote, "The money was not floating in the water for a year. Otherwise, we would have seen diatoms from the full range of the year. We only saw them from the springtime bloom. So this puts a very narrow range on when the money got wet and was subsequently buried on Tina Bar," end quote, Kay said. The scientist said that new information scuttles the FBI's original theory in the 1980s that the money somehow flowed down rivers from Cooper's believed drop zone near Lake Merwin in the southwest of Washington into the Washougal River and out into the Columbia, the so-called Washougal washdown theory. Quote, "We are now able for the first time to use this piece of evidence and eliminate a bunch of theories," end quote, Kay said. However, the new finding also raises more questions than it answers. How did the money enter the water months after Cooper's daring jump? Why did it end up some 18 miles, as the crow flies, from Cooper's suspected drop zone? How did the money get out of the Columbia River and end up mostly intact with rubber bands holding 3 stacks of $20 bills together? Quote, "Cooper is still messing with us," end quote, Kay said with a grin. End of article. So, I want to know what your thoughts are on this article. Do you have any?
Well, I think it scientifically proves what Kay states is that, the money did not land in the river at the time of Cooper's jump, because it only has spring diatoms on it, So I think because of this, only one of two things can be true. One, which is Kay's theory, which somehow after the jump, it wound up in the river, and then in a period of only a few weeks to a few months, somehow washed up on the banks of the Columbia. I kind of have another theory, which we'll get into later, which involves the money being planted right before the little boy found it.
Yeah, I'm not a scientist, so it's really hard for me to comment definitively on this article. But it's interesting, man. It's really interesting. I mean, he's suggesting that it washed up on the shore, or it was deposited there months after the jump. But it only suggests that. It doesn't conclusively prove that. That's what I wanted to say.
Yeah, fair.
Yeah. All right, so we're looking at a map of the jump zone here and all of the evidence found. Do you have anything to say about this map? Can you describe it for our listeners?
How does one describe a map in the days of GPS and Google Maps?
Yeah, so it looks like, so basically there's like a rhombus shaped search area where they believe would be the area where he landed. So it's located like directly east of Le Center and northeast of Le Center. And it's kind of like extends out up to Lake Merwin, and it's just like north of Battleground, Washington, and that's where the FBI believes that he would have jumped out of the plane. And then the money was found to the southwest along the banks of the Columbia River, which is kind of weird because the Columbia River flows from south to north. So the mystery here is, if he jumped out and he survived, how did the money get there? It's so bizarre.
Yeah, there's no way the money would have washed upstream from where he landed.
Yeah, it's just like that boggles my mind, man.
There's, I don't know, potentially he could have, escaped and headed back to Portland, which would, suddenly put you on the other end of the Columbia. And then if you lost or dumped the money into the river from there, it could wash upstream to where they found it. That's really all I got.
Why would it just be a small portion of it buried there? I don't know, man. Let's move on from here. We'll talk about this later, but that's just what boggles my mind.
Yeah. And then the rest of it, like Nate said, it just shows what little evidence they have found in the case. The map doesn't really teach us anything, but it does give a good visual representation of the search area in relation to Portland, the flight path, and where the money was found in the Columbia River.
Yeah. And they never found the parachute. They only found a little portion of that money, and that's basically it.
All right. Time to get on to the physical evidence. Cooper was incredibly meticulous when it came to not leaving evidence behind, but he did make a few mistakes, as nearly anyone in this sort of high-stress, high-complexity operation would. He left behind the following clues. 1. His necktie with mother-of-pearl tie tack. It was slim and black in color. In 2007, the FBI was able to lift 2 partial DNA profiles off of it, but without a full profile or a suspect to compare the DNA to, this evidence is not enough to shed any light on who he was.
I just want to add real quick too that we have no idea if the DNA that was pulled from the tie was D.B Cooper's tie or D.B Cooper's DNA or somebody else's. We have no fucking clue. So
yeah, because this evidence was all collected in a time before DNA testing. I'm pretty sure, So people wouldn't have been as anal as they are nowadays about not getting their own DNA on it. Plus, I've never heard of a partial DNA profile. So I don't even know if that's good for anything.
Well, it means they can pull certain DNA markers up, but they don't have enough DNA to know what the full genome of this sample is. Like, they don't have the full genome; they only have partial. Gotcha. So they're going to be able to match up certain markers in their DNA, but not all of them.
Gotcha. Yeah. So borderline useless. But not entirely.
Not borderline useless, but if they have a suspect to compare the DNA to, and there's a match there, then we could pursue that further. But it's not enough to just go onto a genealogy website and figure it out.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah.
All right. Evidence number 2. 2 hairs found at the scene, one being a body hair and the other being a brown Caucasian head hair. However, both samples of these hairs have either been lost or destroyed due by law enforcement incompetence.
Infuriating, man.
Yeah, very infuriating. I like to point out right here the possibility that DB also could have worn a wig or toupee, so the head hair might have not got them anywhere anyways. Evidence number 3, 8 cigarette butts in the ashtray of seat 18E, which is the window seat that he had moved to following his demands to flight attendant Florence Schaffner. In probably the most infuriating instance of law enforcement incompetence in the entire case, when the FBI sought to test these for DNA back in 1998, they discovered that they had been destroyed years earlier by the LA field office. Sorry, the LV field office, the Vegas field office.
Do you realize what you guys have done? Like, if they still had those cigarette butts, this entire mystery would have been solved by now through genetic genealogy.
Yeah. They would have gone back to every single suspect that was still alive in 1988, and they'd have matched it to somebody. Or nobody.
In modern times, you don't even need a suspect to match it to, man. You could go onto genealogy websites and figure out who this guy's related to, and narrow it down through there.
Yeah, then you're right. Yeah, the cigarettes would have been the smoking gun we were looking for.
Yeah.
But, oh well. All right, evidence number 4. As previously stated, nearly 9 years later in 1980, some of the ransom money was found buried in the sand on the shore of the Columbia River near a place called Tina Bar. Analysis done by the amateur scientists suggests that the bills did not enter the area at the time of the hijacking, but rather the diatoms found on the bills suggest that they were placed there in the springtime. And finally, number 5, 6 letters were sent into different newspapers following the hijacking.
The first letter writer used letters cut from an old newspaper and wrote, quote, "Attention, thanks for the hospitality, was in a rut," end quote, and was signed D.B Cooper. The second was handwritten and was signed as D.B Cooper, postmarked on November 30th, 1971, and sent to Vancouver Province in British Columbia with the following message. Quote, "The composite drawing on page 3, as suspected by the FBI, does not represent the truth. I enjoyed the Grey Cup game. Am leaving Vancouver. Thanks for the hospitality." End quote. The third letter was mailed in Northern Oregon on December 1st, 1971, which was written with cutout letters from a Playboy magazine, which read, quote, "Am alive and doing well in hometown. P.O. The system that beats the system." End quote. Do you think P.O. means piss off the system that beats the system?
I looked at that. I wasn't entirely sure, because you think that it would be postscript, like it should say P.S. But yeah, I'm not entirely sure what P.O. stands for. Portland, Oregon?
I think it's piss off the system that beats the system. I don't know.
That theory better.
All right, anyway, the fourth letter was sent to the Reno Evening Gazette, mailed from Sacramento, California, written with cut and paste letters that read, quote, "Plan ahead for retirement income," end quote, and was signed D.B Cooper. Number 5 was sent on December 11th of that year, sent to the New York Times, Seattle Times, Los Angeles Times, and the Washington Post, and it read, quote, "Sirs, I knew from the start that I wouldn't be caught. I didn't rob Northwest Orient because I thought it would be romantic, heroic, or any of the euphemisms that seem to attach to situations of high risks. I'm no modern-day Robin Hood. Unfortunately, I do have only 14 months to live. My life has been one of hate, turmoil, hunger, and more hate. This seemed to be the fastest and most profitable way to gain a few fast grains of peace of mind. I don't blame people for hating me for what I've done, nor do I blame anybody for wanting me to be caught and punished, though this can never happen. Here are some, not all, of the things working against the authorities. I'm not a boasting man. I left no fingerprints. I wore a toupee. I wore putty makeup. They could add or subtract from the composite 100 times and not come up with an accurate description, and we both know it. I've come and gone on several airline flights already, and I'm not holed up in some obscure backwoods town. Neither am I a psychopathic killer. As a matter of fact, I've never even received a speeding ticket. Thank you for your attention. Signed, D.B. Cooper." I mean, I like how he says I'm not a boasting man and then proceeds to boast.
Yeah. Also, I don't get how you would leave no fingerprints because he was never seen as wearing gloves.
I don't know, man.
Yeah. All right. The last letter was mailed on March 28th of 1972 from Jacksonville, Florida to the Portland Oregonian and read, quote, "This letter is to let you know I am not dead, but really alive and just back from the Bahamas, so your silly troopers up there can stop looking for me. That is just how dumb this government is. I like your articles about me, but you can stop them now. D.B. Cooper is not real. I had to do something with the experience Uncle taught me, so here I am, a very rich man. Uncle gave too much of it to world idiots and now work for me. I had to do it to
It's poorly written, man.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So it's not just me. I had to do it to relieve myself of frustration. I want out of the system and saw a way through good old Unc. Now you know, I am smarter than the system's lackey cops and lame duck leaders. Now it's Uncle's turn to weep and pay one of its own some cash for a change. And please tell the lackey cops D.B. Cooper is not my real name. Signed, a rich man." End quote.
Yeah, I mean, I think all of these letters are just trolls, man. I don't think any of these are the real guy.
Do you want to talk about the secret code that one guy found in this last letter?
That's fucking dumb. But we watched a documentary called D.B. Cooper, Where Are You? On Netflix, and there was some guy who was doing gematria. Is that what it's called? Or gematria?
I think so. I was trying to look it up earlier, but
basically he thinks that there's a code that was written into this letter that says that who was it? Lieutenant Robert Rackstraw or something? Like, yes. I am Robert Rackstraw, found somewhere inside of this letter in code. Which, it's a fucking stretch, man. I think that's a fucking
major stretch. Yeah. Some other guys kind of like debunked him, right? Because
we found I am SpongeBob SquarePants in the same letter. So
yeah,
I thought that was funny. But let's move on. All right. The Dan Cooper hypothesis: was D.B. Cooper Canadian? Belgian comic book artist Albert Weinberg created the comic book series titled Les Aventures de Dan Cooper in the 1950s, which was popular well into the 1960s. It surrounded a character named Dan Cooper, a Royal Canadian Air Force test pilot who would find himself in dangerous and heroic situations. In one edition of the comic book, which coincidentally was published not too long before the actual hijacking, the hero Dan Cooper was featured parachuting out of the back of a plane. Those who believe there is a link to the Dan Cooper of French-Canadian comic book fame tend to point to the fact that during the time leading up to the hijacking, the Royal Canadian Air Force began downsizing, laying off around 500 pilots without warning or a financial safety net. The hopes and dreams of these men would have been shattered, and some may have been financially ruined due to this. Some believe that the Dan Cooper who hijacked Flight 305 may have been a Canadian aviator who was let go from his job as a pilot and took on the name Dan Cooper as sort of a silent nod toward the fictional Canadian aviation hero Dan Cooper, and also point to the fact that he allegedly told one of the flight attendants that he had a grudge but not against their airline. The comic book series was obscure only in French, never having been translated into English, and a potential link between the two Dan Coopers was only considered as recently as 2009. So, there's just one more consideration to throw on top of this fucking mountainous case.
Yeah. It seems like the more you dig into the case, the more possibilities there are.
And the less you know.
Yeah. Finally, let's go over the physical description of Cooper based on the flight attendant's accounts. He was a white male, mid-40s, 5'10" to 6 feet tall, 170 to 180 pounds, average to well-built, olive, Latin appearance, medium smooth complexion, dark brown or black hair, normal style, whatever normal style means, parted on the left and combed back. Sideburns were at low ear level. Eyes are possibly brown, but this is not definitive as he put on wraparound sunglasses in the middle of the flight. He spoke intelligently with a low voice, no particular accent, possibly from the Midwest. I want to point out right here that I always thought the French-Canadian theory, didn't really hold a lot of water because they said he had no particular accent, but also right here, there's this possibly from the Midwest, which heavy Midwest accents definitely have like a Canadian crossover, because this guy would have had to have known how to read French.
I don't think by Midwest they're talking about like Minnesota or something. I think they're just talking something super generic, like generic American accent. Man, let's say that he was Canadian. He could have just been part of like the anglicized part of Canada, but also knew enough French to be familiar with Dan Cooper. You know what I mean? That's kind of what I took from it as a possibility anyway. Yeah.
All right. Continuing on, he was a heavy smoker of Raleigh filter tip cigarettes. He was wearing a black or brown suit, white shirt, narrow black tie, black dress suit, black rain type overcoat or dark top coat, and brown shoes. Described as having a sort of disinterested, let's get this over with type of look on his face.
All right, man. Well, that pretty much covers the description of him. So let's conclude here. The incident helped introduce permanent changes to the aviation industry. In particular, a device on 727s known as the Cooper vane, which is a latch installed on the exterior of the plane, which prevents the aft staircase from being opened while airborne. In less than a year, 13 copycat hijacking attempts were made in the skies over the US, with 5 of these attempts resulting in a successful mid-air egress from the airliner, but all suspects were either captured or killed by police during their escape attempts. The tale of D.B. Cooper remains the sole case of unsolved aerial hijacking in history. Who was he? Why did he do it? Did he survive the jump, or did he make a Looney Tunes-style, human-shaped hole in the ground somewhere in the wilderness of the Pacific Northwest? Alright man, through our powers combined, let's list off some points that could point toward him either making it or making a fatal attempt. So first up, let's go over some points that are in favor of him making it. What have you got, man?
In favor that he survived the jump, no body was ever found, and no parachute was ever found. You think that if he didn't make it, they'd have found the remains. They would have found money, parachute, body, more than just a small amount of cash 9 years later. There was something I read or saw somewhere. It was really obscure, but there were possible reports of private pilots near the area of the plane seeing a flare that night at the same time in the same vicinity. So if that's true, he could have landed and either he or an accomplice could have shot up a flare so that they could have figured out where each other was so he could eventually get to a getaway vehicle and make it out of the forest.
I didn't hear that, man, but I don't know if I trust that.
I don't know if I trust that either because, like I said, it was really obscure. It was really quick. I don't even remember exactly where I saw or heard that, but I thought it was an interesting note. But yeah, that's really all I have for evidence that he did survive, is that there is no physical evidence of a failed jump.
Oh, that's all you got, huh? All right, so
Yeah.
let me list off what I've got. Sorry. So nobody was reported as being missing during that time that could have been matched up with DB. Like, likely that someone's family or friends would report him as missing if he just fell to his death in the middle of nowhere. So no missing person that ever got linked to being possibly DB. There were 5 copycat hijackers that made similar jumps successfully, and some of them were under even worse circumstances. So, possible, yes.
Wow, worse circumstances than in the middle of the night in the middle of the forest during a storm.
There
pitch
was
black
one
conditions.
guy who jumped out when it was snowing, so yeah.
Okay.
You know, some people would point to the fact that the money never turned up in circulation, and they would sort of use that to support the fact that he probably died. But I think that this is sort of like a double-edged sword, because we know that he was extremely meticulous about leaving evidence behind, and he was probably also aware of law enforcement countermeasures. So I think it's possible that he would have known that there would be a chance that the FBI would keep a record of all the serial numbers on the bills, and he could have just decided to sit on the money for a while until he knew whether it was clean or not. And it didn't take long for the FBI to really put the word out there that they recorded all of the serial numbers for the ransom money, which, you know, at that point, he would know that it was all worthless, and it would be better for him to just bury it somewhere and to go the rest of his life as if nothing ever happened, you know?
Yeah.
So that's a point that could be argued on either side.
Yeah. I agree.
Yeah. I mean, alternately, he might not have secured the bag of cash to himself securely enough, and the force of his parachute opening might have ripped the bag away from him, which did happen to one of the copycat hijackers.
Yeah.
I mean, okay, so due to the cloud cover, he would have had little to no way of knowing where he was jumping, right? So, but with some back of the envelope math, he could probably roughly estimate it by calculating where the plane would be, like after a certain amount of time being airborne, and at a speed that he himself pre-designated. So he might have been able to calculate exactly where he was jumping. So I think it's possible that he was accurate in his calculations, and he might have jumped out exactly where he meant to.
Yeah, or at least close enough to not just be lost in the middle of some forest, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, man. Do you have anything else when it comes to evidence that he made it?
Nah, I think we touched on some pretty good points.
All right, man. Evidence that he died.
He jumped out of a plane into the middle of a forest at nighttime during a storm. It would be pitch black, right? Cloud cover, right? You're coming in, you know, you got a parachute deployed, but unless you've really pinpointed a good landing spot, you're going to be in possibly some thick, tall trees that you can really get tangled up in. You can get cut up by the branches on the way down, right? You know, if you do die or get severely injured in this landing, one of the reasons maybe they never found a body was he could have been eaten by a bear or a wolf or any predator that happened
Bigfoot.
upon. Yeah, Bigfoot, you know?
Can you imagine parachuting out of the 727 into a forest successfully with $200,000 only to get eaten by Bigfoot?
Could you imagine that two of the biggest mysteries in human history are linked together? Like D.B Cooper lands in the forest and he meets Bigfoot and they just become buddies.
Bigfoot was his accomplice.
Yeah, that's why we never found him, because Bigfoot's like, yo, I'm the reigning hide and seek champ of the world. I'll keep you hidden.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then the other thing.
Sorry to interrupt you, but or he just lands and then you know, Bigfoot offers him a better life, so he just decides, I don't need this money. I'm gonna go live with Bigfoot.
Yeah, just like tosses it in the river or something.
Yeah.
Or just burns it for fire. Yeah. The other argument I have that he died, which we just covered, is the money never entered circulation. Yeah. It's like, you think if he lived, he would eventually spent it. It's like, yeah, the FBI released the serial numbers to banks and businesses and eventually to the public, but yeah, you sit on it for a decade plus and maybe they're not looking that hard for that kind of money, or you're spending it like little by little, like here and there, just sprinkling it like throughout your life. Like you go on vacation, right? You go on vacation to other countries that accept American currency, or, you go to that country and you go to a currency exchange place and you give them your stolen 20s and you get your foreign currency in exchange. You go enjoy your vacation.
Yeah. So none of the money ever turned up in circulation. So, I mean, strong argument either way, if you ask me. Yeah. It doesn't really tell you anything.
Definitely double-edged sword, like you said, about the money never showing up ever again.
Yeah. Anything else you got, man?
No, sir.
All right, so the remaining stuff that I've got, it was late November, and he was going to jump out of an airliner in nothing but a business suit. Like, he didn't even request a helmet or goggles or jump boots or any type of warmer clothing, which it kind of seems like a suicide mission, or, at the very least, a ball froster, Like, he seems to have been underprepared for the leap that he was going to make, Like, he was less prepared than he could have been, at least, because he could have requested this stuff. But
yeah,
like, if he had enough foresight, he could have asked for more safety equipment. Like, the parachute that he got was one that could not be steered. So, it's a high chance of injury upon landing. It's the kind that just like you just drop straight down, just slower. So,
yeah,
when you
straight down if there's no cross breeze, but there's a storm going on, that could blow you anywhere.
Right, exactly. But, considering the extra weight of the money, not wearing the proper boots to protect his ankles, and then in the pitch black over the wilderness, like, I think this also speaks towards him not having much, if any, experience with parachuting or skydiving. Because I think if he did, he would have had the foresight to ask for that stuff.
Agreed. Yeah. I always wondered that, about just the absolute horrendous jump and landing conditions. It's like, is he a highly trained skydiver, or does he have little to no idea about how it's done? Because you think any highly trained skydiver would have not made that jump under those conditions due to the risk.
Yeah. Yes. And then to add on to that, depending on what elevation that he landed at, he either landed in like the pouring rain in late November, or in the snow if he landed at a higher elevation. So without any sort of cold weather clothing and without any actual survival gear. Yeah.
If he was doing this solo, I don't really see a high chance of him making it out of there alive, So I think the conditions and his lack of proper attire for wilderness survival kind of points to him having an accomplice on the ground somewhere.
Possibly,
an extraction plan.
He had to have had some sort of plan.
Yeah.
All right, man. If you don't have anything else to add to that section, let's move on to the next, shall we?
All right. Yeah.
So next up, we were each tasked with reading the top suspects on the D.B Cooper Wikipedia page. There were 16 of them in total, but we've each narrowed them down to our personal top 3 potential suspects. So Kyle, go ahead and start by telling me who your number 3 choice is, and then read the little Wikipedia section about them, and then, move on to number 2 and then number 1. And then, conclude by telling us how confident that you are that any of these people actually are DB.
All right. My number 3 pick was Ted Braden. And according to the Wikipedia page, I'll read this off for you. Theodore Burdett Braden Jr., born 1928, died 2007, was a Special Forces commando during the Vietnam War, a master skydiver, and a convicted felon. He was believed by many within the Special Forces community, both at the time of the hijacking and in subsequent years, to have been Cooper. Born in Ohio, Braden first joined the military at the age of 16 in 1944, serving with the 101st Airborne during World War II. He eventually became one of the military's leading parachutists, often representing the Army in international skydiving tournaments, and his military records list him as having made 911 jumps. During the 1960s, Braden was a team leader within the MAC-V SOG, a classified commando unit of the Green Berets which conducted unconventional warfare operations during the Vietnam War. He also served as a military skydiving instructor, teaching halo jumping techniques to members of Project Delta. For those of you who don't know, halo stands for high altitude, low opening. It's a very dangerous way to skydive. The special forces do it so that they can't be picked up on radar when they deploy their chutes. You know, you open your chute at extremely low altitudes. You also jump from very high altitudes so that the plane you're jumping from can't be tracked. You know, which would kind of point to how do you know where you're going to land in stormy, cloudy conditions? You know, and if it's windy, you have a parachute that you can't steer. It's going to push you all over the place. But if you know how to halo jump, if you know how to open that chute on that bleeding edge, you're going to get a lot closer to where you want to land.
Yeah.
Braden spent 23 months in Vietnam conducting classified operations within both North and South Vietnam, as well as Laos and Cambodia. In December 1966, Braden deserted his unit in Vietnam and made his way to the Congo to serve as a mercenary, but only served there a short time before being arrested by CIA agents and taken back to the United States for a court-martial. Despite having committed a capital offense by deserting in wartime, Braden was given an honorable discharge and barred from re-enlisting in the military in exchange for his continued secrecy about the MAC-V SOG program. Braden was profiled in the October 1967 issue of Ramparts magazine, wherein he was described by fellow Special Forces veteran and journalist Don Duncan as being someone with a, quote, secret death wish, unquote, who, quote, continually places himself in unnecessary danger but always seems to get away with it, end quote, specifically referring to Braden's disregard for military skydiving safety regulations. Duncan also claimed that during Braden's time in Vietnam, he was, quote, continuously involved in shady deals to make money, end quote. Following his military discharge in 1967, the details of Braden's life are largely unknown, but at the time of the hijacking, he was a truck driver for Consolidated Freightways, which was headquartered in Vancouver, Washington, just across the Columbia River from Portland and not far from the suspected drop zone of Ariel, Washington. It is also known that at some point in the early 1970s, he was investigated by the FBI for stealing $250,000 during a trucking scam he had allegedly devised, but he was never charged for the supposed crime. In 1980, Braden was indicted by a federal grand jury for driving an 18-wheeler full of stolen goods from Arizona to Massachusetts, but it is unknown whether there was a conviction in that case. 2 years later, Braden was arrested in Pennsylvania for driving a stolen vehicle with fictitious plates and for having no driver's license. Braden eventually ended up being sent to federal prison at some point during the late 1980s, serving time in Pennsylvania, but the precise crime is unknown. Despite his ability as a soldier, he was not well liked personally and was described by a family member as, quote, the perfect combination of high intelligence and criminality, end quote. From his time working covert operations in Vietnam, he would likely have possessed the then classified knowledge about the ability and proper specifications for jumping from a 727, perhaps having done it himself on MAC-V SOG missions. Physically, Braden's military records list him as 5'8", which is shorter than the height description of at least 5'10" given by the two flight attendants, but this military measurement would have been taken in his stocking feet, and he may have appeared somewhat taller in shoes. However, he possessed a dark complexion from years of outdoor military service, had short, dark hair, a medium athletic build, and was 43 years of age at the time of the hijacking, which are features all in line with the descriptions of Cooper.
Right on, man. Yeah, this guy's actually on my list too, so just put a thumbtack in that.
Cool. Sounds good. All right. Next on my list is going to be Ted Mayfield. This description is much shorter than the previous one. I apologize for how long that one was. Theodore Ernest Mayfield, born 1935, died 2015, was a Special Forces veteran, pilot, competitive skydiver, and skydiving instructor. He served time in 1994 for negligent homicide after 2 of his students died when their parachutes failed to open, and was later found indirectly responsible for 13 additional skydiving deaths due to faulty equipment and training. In 2010, he was sentenced to 3 years probation for piloting a plane 26 years after losing his pilot's license and rigging certificates. He was suggested repeatedly as a suspect early in the investigation, according to FBI agent Ralph Himmelsbach, who knew Mayfield from a prior dispute at a local airport. He was ruled out based partly on the fact that he called Himmelsbach less than 2 hours after Flight 305 landed in Reno to volunteer advice on standard skydiving practices and possible landing zones, as well as information on local skydivers.
That is really interesting that he would phone in to offer advice, like right after 305 landed. Like it seems like he might be fucking trying to, this is my alibi type of deal.
That is why he was ruled out. That the FBI said that this was an airtight alibi. He called us when D.B Cooper would have still been trying to get out of that goddamn forest, But this is a time before caller ID. He could have had any friend call from any phone, the FBI, or even he could have like just barely made it out of the forest and called from like a payphone or something. You're like, oh yeah, I'm at home right now and I just saw this on the news. Let me help you out. So that's why I picked him as my number 2. And then my number 1 is not exactly on the Wikipedia list, but my number 1 is Lynn Doyle Cooper's brother. So Lynn Doyle Cooper is on Wikipedia, and I'll read this short one. Lynn Doyle, or L.D. Cooper, born 1931, died 1999. A leather worker and Korean War veteran, was proposed as a suspect in July 2011 by his niece Marla Cooper. As an 8-year-old, she recalled Cooper and another uncle planning something, quote, very mischievous, end quote, involving the use of, quote, expensive walkie-talkies, end quote, at her grandmother's house in Sisters, Oregon, 150 miles southeast of Portland. The next day, The next day, Flight 305 was hijacked. And though the uncles ostensibly were turkey hunting, L.D. Cooper came home wearing a bloody shirt. The result, he said, of an auto accident. Later, Marla claimed her parents came to believe that L.D. was the hijacker. She also recalled that her uncle, who died in 1999, was obsessed with the Canadian comic book hero Dan Cooper and, quote, had one of his comic books thumbtacked to his wall, end quote, although he was not a skydiver or paratrooper. In August 2011, New York Magazine published an alternative witness sketch, reportedly based on a description by Flight 305 eyewitness Robert Gregory, depicting horn-rimmed sunglasses, a russet-colored suit jacket with wide lapels, and marcelled hair. The article observed that L.D. Cooper had wavy hair that looked marcelled, as did Dwayne Weber, see below. The FBI announced that no fingerprints had been found on a guitar strap made by L.D. Cooper. 1 week later, they added that his DNA did not match the partial DNA profile obtained from the hijacker's tie, but acknowledged that there is no certainty that the hijacker was the source of the organic material obtained from the tie. So, there's my number 1. I think it was Lynn Doyle Cooper's brother, which I dug and I dug and I dug because his niece, Lynn Doyle's niece, said, I think it was my uncle, and he was kind of getting into something with another uncle, but I could never find the name of this other uncle, right? And L.D. Cooper, like they said, not a paratrooper, so I don't think there's any way he was the one that jumped out of the plane, but I also think that there was an accomplice. I think LD was the accomplice on the ground, and his brother, whoever the hell that is my top choice as D.B. Cooper.
That's interesting, man, because all 3 of yours were on my list, just in different orders. So,
no shit.
Yeah. So, so number 3, I had Lynn Doyle Cooper. the Lynn Doyle Cooper one. So
Yeah.
not my most confident one. And then I had Ted Mayfield and then Ted Braden as in my number
so
one.
you had it exactly opposite as I had it.
Yeah. So, but do I believe that any of these three are the actual guy? No, I don't. I don't think that D.B Cooper is on this list.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's fair. But, you know, I would have put LD at the bottom of my list if I was saying LD, but I'm trying to say it was his brother, the other uncle named by the niece who was planning something devious according to her recollection.
That little girl was too young to have any of those memories be reliable, in my opinion.
But you know,
it's all somebody's like eyewitness account from when they were like what 8 years old. I don't trust it, man. I don't trust it, honestly.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's not much of a thing to like really like hang on to as like an 8-year-old, is just this weird conversation about walkie-talkies. But they showed up for Thanksgiving dinner, you know, at LD and his brother, both bruised and bloodied, according to other sources. Yes, allegedly, according to sources I wrote, from what they say was a car accident, which I could find no evidence on, you know. So they look like they could have just escaped the forest, according to her description of the events.
Yeah. All right, man. Do you want to talk about the D.B Cooper Where Are You documentary, or do you want to skip that?
I think we can skip it because we kind of touched on it a little bit for like the code.
It's nothing to re-up your Netflix subscription over. It was just a piece of shit, pretty much.
I liked watching it because it kind of got me into, you know, into getting into like my own research, because I didn't have a point to start from when doing research for this article, you know. And spoiler alert to all of the listeners, Nate does 95 to 99% of all the work of all the episodes. He does all the research. He writes the script, right? He's got it all dialed in. This was by far the most effort I've put into any episode, and I had no idea where to start. So I just like that from giving me a place to start from. But that was about it.
That does remind me, though, that I do want to say that this documentary / series, whatever you want to call it, what it did for me was let me know how fucking crazy some people are that delve deep into this subject. That Tom Colbert guy, holy shit, man. That's a perfect example of somebody who dove down a rabbit hole with no bottom to it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Just absolutely. With no bottom and like, just it's like the sunk cost fallacy. Do you know what that is? Like where someone believes that they've already invested so much that they can't cut their losses and run. So they just keep pressing on. Looking at this one guy named Robert Rackstraw. I don't know what you thought of the interaction between Tom Colbert and Robert Rackstraw, but for me, I was like, man, I totally understand why this Robert Rackstraw is acting the way that he is toward this Tom Colbert guy.
Yeah, because he's feel like he's being ambushed, you know,
harassed, ambushed for decades, and he feels that it's like slightly amusing, so he's not coming out and just like telling him that I'm not DB Cooper, stop bothering me, blah blah blah. He's like kind of dropping these hints that don't exclude himself, but don't, you know, confirm it either. Yeah, when you watch his early interviews with the FBI and news from the 1970s, he's very cocky about it in a way. You know, they're like, "Are you DB Cooper?" He's like, "I could be. You know, maybe I am, maybe I'm not. I think that's for the people to decide." You know, and like all that stuff. And when Colbert first approaches him in, I think it was like 2013, working at a boatyard in Coronado, San Diego, you know, he kind of has like the same demeanor, but then he quickly gets really annoyed by Colbert and other people that are approaching him, you know, and I think at that point, like the joke is done,
for this guy, and he just wants to be fucking left alone, and
they're like,
sorry.
when the FBI guy says that we don't believe that Robert Rackstraw was D.B. Cooper, and then someone else asks him, like, do you think that you owe Robert Rackstraw an apology? He's like, no, I don't. Apologize for what? I didn't do anything wrong. Like, this dude just like refuses to accept any contrary evidence,
Yeah. And towards the end of the documentary, they do kind of point towards that. It's like this guy is responsible for bringing FBI level evidence to the forefront of the people that are trying to solve the D.B. Cooper case. You got to tip his hat to that. But when he locked on to Rackstraw as a suspect, it gave him tunnel vision, where every bit of evidence, no matter where it pointed, just looked like it was pointing back to him. And anything that blatantly didn't was just disregarded.
Oh, yeah. It's just total confirmation bias.
Yes.
All right, man. Well, let's try and solve this sumbitch once and for all, man. So, who do you think that this guy was? Do you still think that it's the uncle of LD? What was his? LD who?
LD Cooper.
LD Cooper. Yeah.
That's the best I got.
But do you think that it was him, or do you think that it's just probably somebody else, and that's just a small possibility?
I don't know, man. You know what? I'm going to say yes. I'm going to say it was LD Cooper's brother, right? Because like you said, it's definitely no one on the Wikipedia list. But I think that there's this little sliver in that Wikipedia list that includes the real D.B. Cooper.
I'm going to have to disagree, man. I don't think that anyone on that Wikipedia list or even in the periphery was D.B. Cooper. So I think the Wikipedia article is pretty much worthless. I don't think that's because I think that the FBI would have been able to uncover who this person was, by now. Yeah. So why did he do it? I mean, for money, obviously, greed, $200,000. Why
Did he though? Did he do it for greed and money? I'm not entirely sure,
So
because
what do you think?
There was a couple of theories that he was either wronged by the airline or he was wronged by the government, and seeing as how the money was never spent, maybe he didn't do it for the money. Maybe he did it just to stick it to the man, to stick it to the airline, to stick it to the government or whoever, just so they could feel a little sting, I mean, that $200,000 was, about the equivalent of $1 million in today's world. Over that. Yeah. So, I mean, most likely he did it for the money, but I do think that there is a possibility there that it actually wasn't about the money. I guess I looked at too many theories where it really wasn't about the money at all.
I think you have this romanticized version of D.B. Cooper in your head where you look at him more as like a folk hero or something.
Yes.
Who like didn't do it for the money, but I think he did it for the money, only the money. And he came up with this plan. I mean, I'm trying to be real here. Those kind of criminals just don't really exist who do this kind of shit just to make a statement,
Well, why do you think they never found him?
Well, let's get into that.
Okay.
So why do you think that he did it the day before Thanksgiving? My thoughts were that it would give him some extra time to kind of get away, hide amongst crowds of travelers, that sort of thing. The extra, the 2-day weekend, basically, or the 4-day weekend, my bad.
Yeah. Absolutely. Especially if this guy had a job, now he has all this extra time. I also think that this comes into play at the airport buying a ticket. The airports are packed with travelers, so it's not like the FBI can go ask the ticket people, hey, do you remember a dude that looks like just about every other dude that came through here today?
Yeah. Yeah. Do you think that he lived or died, man?
I think he lived.
You think he lived? Okay.
I think he's dead today. I for sure think he's dead today.
Dude, for
whoever the fuck D.B. Cooper was,
99.9% sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. You think he lived? All right. So, I think that he died, man, and I think he went splat, dude. I think he made a Looney Tune style human shaped hole wherever he landed. All right. So let me get into my notes. So the money location is what bothers me the most. So first of all, I don't think that the bills were deliberately buried there. Like, for one, the damage done to the bills is consistent with damage done from river currents instead of just like, from being buried there on purpose.
Yeah.
Because I read something about like the way that the bills were deteriorated from the outer edges in kind of like a circular pattern. That's consistent with damage from river currents. And, second of all, it's 10 to 20 miles away from where the authorities believe that he jumped from. I think that there's an explanation for this, though, which I'll get into. So
what if it was just like a fuck it moment, right? Like he's about to jump out of the plane. He grabs one fat stack of bills, right? Just like one rubber band bundle, zips the bag back up, and as he jumps, it's just a fuck you, and he just wings it off to like the left.
All right, so I do want to ask you how you think that the money that was found in that location. Like, how do you think it ended up there?
Well, I have a theory that it was planted from something from that documentary, where I think it was someone met that guy Dick Briggs at a party, and he pointed out this couple, and it was like, you see a couple right there? Like in like a really short time, they're gonna find some of the money. And like a week later, that exact couple fucking finds some of the money.
There's but there's no way to like corroborate that. It's just what some fucking guy said happened 40 years prior. Like, come on.
True. Yeah.
It's
You're
just
right. My
some guy could be telling
no
a tall
fucking
tale.
water. Yeah. Yes. My theory holds no fucking water.
Yeah.
But look at you. You don't believe that. You're looking for a plausible explanation, and I definitely did not come up with any of that shit on how that stack of bills got to where it was. So I think that's kind of why I leaned into that other one.
All right, so I think this is what happened. So I think that the jump zone that the FBI believes is where he jumped out of the plane is roughly accurate, right?
Yeah.
I do believe that. And then I think that he just went splat, right? Somewhere in that area went splat, dead. And then as to how that money ended up in the Columbia River. So if you look at the shape of the Columbia River, it kind of flows from east to west, right? Between Portland and Vancouver, Washington. And then it curves up towards the north, and then it flows out into the Pacific Ocean, right? To like the far north of this area.
Yes.
So what I think happened was, as D.B. Cooper was going down the stairs to jump, some of the money fell out onto the staircase, and that $5,800. And then as he's jumping, I think it rested on the stairs for a while before eventually the wind pushed it off, and then it landed in the river somewhere.
Yeah. Or maybe he like left it like in the aisle on purpose as like a tip for like the crew or something, or another just like middle finger.
I don't think so, man. I think what makes the most sense to me, as he was going down the stairs to jump, some of it fell out because he was seen stuffing money into one of the bags for the parachutes, if I'm not mistaken. He was using one of the parachute bags to stuff money into.
Okay.
Which makes sense. Like it wasn't properly secured. Some of it fell out as he's walking down the staircase right before he jumps. And then, at a certain point, the wind just blows the money off. It lands in the river or nearby the river, maybe. Makes its way into the river somehow. And I think that's how it ended up that far south.
I've got one more incredibly thin theory I'm gonna run by you. So they narrow the search area from when the exact time and location when they experience a sudden what was it?
The jolt.
It was a dip in the nose. A jolt. Yeah, a jolt, right? I kind of find it semi hard to believe that like one person can make a big noticeable jump. I mean, like
when you're at the ass end of the plane like that.
Yeah, but it's not like a small plane. like, I get that you could feel something. So my super thin theory is he's standing on the back of the stairs and he just kind of like jumps up and back onto the stairs one time to rock the plane and then waits another 30 minutes and then gently just kind of falls off the stairs.
I mean, maybe, man, maybe.
It's really, it's thin, right? Because he told the people not to come out of the cockpit, you know, just like, you fucking stay in there until we land, right? Mm-hmm. And if you're going to pull this little stunt to make them think you jumped, I would think that there's a high chance that they might stick their head out of the cockpit to make sure you actually did jump. You know, they didn't, but I don't know if I would risk a little maneuver like that, you know? So, very thin.
I don't think that's thin. I think that's right in line with something he would do.
Okay, well, yeah, and it would also explain why nothing was ever found at the supposed drop zone, and the money was found, you know, upriver, because he could have, you know,
strong possibility, man. Strong possibility.
Cool. Wow, you agreed with that a lot more than I thought you would.
Yeah. And as for him being Canadian or not, strong possibility in my mind. Possibility.
Definitely strong possibility. Yeah.
And I think that, so I lean more towards him dying, right? And if that's true, I think that could be a solid explanation for why there was no missing persons report that was linked to D.B Cooper. If he lives in Canada, and at the time, according to the documentary we watched, like the Canadian authorities and the American authorities, they weren't really cooperating with each other on this. So, yeah. I think that the strong possibility he was a Canadian guy who went splat in Washington or maybe even Oregon.
Very nice.
Is there anything else that you wanted to go over? What about the rare earth metals that they found in the tie? Do you want to talk about that? Do you have anything to say about that?
Yeah. So when I saw that pop up in the documentary and like a couple other spots, you know, where they like, you know, electron microscoped his fucking tie, you know, like this is how many fucking years later when they put this thing under a microscope, like where has it been? How many hands has it crossed? You know, like,
and we don't even know if it's his tie.
Yeah, that too. You know, it's like he could have like stole or borrowed someone else's clothes because, you know, maybe he's not the type of person to wear a suit and tie to work. Maybe he's like a blue collar guy and this is all a disguise. You know, there was the one letter, the letter's probably fake, but it says I was wearing like a wig and makeup and all this other stuff, you know? And then they even interviewed some lady who used to be like master of disguise for CIA, you know? And everything about Cooper's physical description, she just poo-pooed all of it, right? Yeah. She was like, that doesn't do you any good. It's like anything that matches that description can be thrown right out the fucking window, you know, because if you're going to get away with something like that, you're not going to look like you.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So I don't think it was his tie. The rare earth metals, like they said, commercially pure titanium, not titanium alloy from like tools that normal people use, but like aircraft grade shit, expensive stuff. But yeah, you know, could have come from anywhere. Yeah. If this guy worked for the airline, maybe building planes, you wouldn't wear a suit and a tie while you build planes.
There's so many anomalies when it comes to this case that, you know, I have to just kind of don't consider any of these small anomalies because I think they're nothing but distractions because they could have some weird, honest explanation to them. And I think it's going to just obfuscate, the case itself because it's going to lead you down rabbit holes that have no end to them. Yeah. Well, is there anything else you want to go over before we get out of here, man?
Did you want to discuss if the letters were fake or real?
I think they're all fake, man. Just trolls.
Okay. Yep. I'll go with that. I
don't believe any of those for a fucking millisecond.
Yeah. Yeah, I think if the actual guy sent a letter, they probably would have found him.
I don't think that he would be the type of guy to do that because I think he just did it for money and to get away with it. I don't think he needed to make a statement to taunt the police or anything. I think it's just trolls.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, plus, you know, if he fucking did a Wile E. Coyote imprint into the earth, then he wouldn't be sending any letters anyways.
Yeah, exactly. Well, do you have any apologies, shout outs, or clarifications to make today, man?
Yeah, I'd like to apologize to all of the Cooperites and Cooperettes, or whatever you call yourselves. You know, if we've, you know, poo-pooed any of your theories. I know a lot of you are very hardcore in your theories and opinions, and I'm sorry if you don't think our rendition has done it any justice, and I also apologize that you're never going to get the answer you're looking for. Nobody is. You know, all the time you spent, I hope you've had fun, because it's definitely a waste of time.
Yeah. So I'd like to give a shout out to the real heroes out there, you know, the first responders who answered the call and rushed into certain danger. And by that, I mean the first people who added us on Instagram. So
Yes.
we've got Josh N, who was the very first random listener to add us. And by random, I just mean he's got no previous connection to us. I'm not going to say your full last name just in case you don't want some guy blasting out your full name on a podcast, but Josh N, you know who you are, the very first random listener who sought us out on Instagram to follow us. So thanks, Josh. You're one of the heroes.
Cheers to you, Josh.
Yep. Next, we've got James C, who also added us, but didn't say anything, but thank you anyway, James. And we've got Rachel M, who we've shouted out here before, but she's also sought us out on Instagram. So thank you, Rachel. As always, you're an absolute saint and pillar of the community. And last but not least, we've got the Washbrook Show, who appears to be a British man based on his accent and a wall socket that I saw in one of his videos. And he makes kind of quirky videos and memes using 80s toys, mostly Star Wars and Transformers related. And he says that he enjoys listening to the show both in the car and while he's taking a massive dump, which I believe him when he says they're massive, considering that most of our episodes are over an hour long. So thank you for your service and keep shitting, hero.
We gotta check out those videos, man. Those sound like fun.
Yeah. All right, man, I think it's time to get out of here. Like sands through the hourglass, so too are the minutes of our podcast. But don't fret, dear listener. We'll be back again to breathe new life into an old mystery next time.
Remember, folks, the truth is out there, somewhere in the ether, and through our powers combined, we'll solve that sumbitch, once and for all.
This is Super Mystery Bros. Jesus Christ, man. Are you smoking the world's largest cigarette right now?
She wound up not going outside. I ate the pasta that I didn't eat. I finished cooking it and I hopped on here, and then Caitlin came home, and then she was on the phone with the in-laws, and then they wanted to talk to me because I haven't seen them in forever. So yeah.
Did you tell them that you have more important things to do right now?
At a certain point, yeah, I was like, yeah, I gotta get back to this podcast.